smaller than dust on this map, lies the greatest thing we have, the dirt in which our roots may grow, and the right to call it home.
We are ending a series called We Can't Stay Here. And if you've been here with us the last few weeks, as Zach said, it's come to a conclusion. If you're visiting with us today or it's your first time or in a while since you've been here, I'm going to do my very best to recap some of it, but you really need to go back and listen to it if you're inspired by what you hear today as to why it is that we are coming as a church collectively to say, hey, look, God's been doing some amazing things in the life of our church, but we can't stay here. All right, first week we just kind of laid it all out and said, hey, God is good and we're grateful. That's just the big theme of a few weeks ago. We just said, we want to talk about where we were 3.5 years ago, and it was not as good. God was great, but we were struggling. And just where we come, it's a mountaintop for us. It may not be where the fullness we believe where God wants to take us, but right now we're just being thankful for where we are and really comparing it and saying, okay, we want our thankfulness to drive us, to launch us into where God wants us to go. And we talked about all of it centered around our vision, right? If you've heard our mission statement before, it's humbly point everyone to absolute hope. Hopefully you've heard that a couple times if you've been a Journey. But the reason we do this is it's important. It's one of those things that we said, look, we want people to continue to remember what it is that we do as a church, but it's also important to remember why we do it. And the word in the middle there, everyone, is the reason why. Because we want to see every one of your friends' stories changed by absolute hope. We want more Danielle's, we want more AJ's, we want more Pete and Sam's like this morning. We want more stories changed by absolute hope. And in order to do that, we have to remember that when we point everyone to absolute hope, it's not this faceless mob, it's not this big number that doesn't really motivate us when it comes to the lostness of our community. It's your family members, it's your friends, it's your coworkers, it's the people that are beside you. It's the people that are with you in your day-to-day life, your circle of activity, and they all have names and faces. You care about them, and their lives need hope, and we want to see their stories changed. They all have names and faces. Their lives matter to God, and that's the reason that we humbly point everyone to absolute hope. And as a church, we set some goals in the first week, and these are the numbers I gave you. We said we can't stay here, but 3,000, 300,000. If you don't know what those are, I'll explain those again here in a little bit. But those were just some things we put out in front of us and said, look, we're going for it. We're just going for it. We can't stay here. We didn't get blessed by God to just sit and remain. We're moving forward with what God's called us to do, and we really feel like these numbers are going to be important to us over the next several years. Now, we talked about it last week and said, well, what's it going to take to get there? And it's going to take us risking everything. That may sound like a crazy notion, but the truth is that we feel like God's given us everything. He's given us everything to do something with. And as we read the story of the parable of the three servants last week, we only see two outcomes that give us an example of what we're supposed to do is risk everything, invest everything, leverage everything that he has given us for his purpose, for his story, for his mission. Or the truth is we'd really just bury it in the ground and we don't do anything with it. And we don't want to be known for that. And so we struggle with this idea of, well, what we've been blessed with, your passion, your talents, your abilities, your resources, your gifts, all those things have been given to you and entrusted to you by God. What are you doing with them? And we asked that question, later on. We said, what has God given you to bring hope to Lake Norman? And the good news about that is he's given you everything. He's given you everything that you need to do everything he's called you to do. Okay, sometimes you think you're supposed to be doing something and you're like, well, I just don't have it. I'm telling you that God has given you everything that you need to do exactly what he's called you individually to do. And then collectively as a church, we feel the exact same way, but that it requires us to risk, it requires us to grow, which includes changing, and it requires us to reach beyond ourselves if we want to really bring hope to this community. And we shared last week this new hashtag, this new kind of renaming our Do Something Now and our projects that we do when we go and serve in Lake Norman, because we want it to be individually first and then collectively as a church second. The hashtag Hope Lake Norman. And every time you see that, I want you to just think, what am I doing to bring hope to Lake Norman? What am I doing today to bring hope to Lake Norman? We had a few this week. We had some people hashtag Rooms at the Inn volunteers and things we did here Friday night to give a warm bed and a warm meal to those in need. And we had people. We have some folks that their job is health. They're nutritionists and they started hashtagging their work posts about Hope Lake Norman, bringing Hope Lake Norman through the health that they want to promote. We saw life groups start to hashtag Hope Lake Norman because they were packing their backpacks and they're beginning to get a better understanding of why we do what we do with Blythe Landing, when we give them backpacks and help these kids have a meal over the weekends. We had another life group pack 200 sandwiches for the homeless. And that's just this past week. Just a few people beginning to get the understanding that we've been given something to leverage. We've been given something to risk. We've been given something to be used by God to bring hope to this community. And what does it look like for you? And what does it look like for me? And we ended last week talking about the idea that we really needed to surrender that. That starts with surrender. And we're going to kind of pick up on that notion today. That really does start with a surrendered heart. It starts with us surrendering what we've been entrusted to him and saying, God, now what? Well, now what is we're going to take some action. Today's the action day, okay? Now what is action? To start taking some steps. To run the race we've been called to run. One of my verses over this past year for my one word in 2014 was from 1 Corinthians 9. And in verse 24, it says this. Paul says this. Listen, everyone's running a race. Okay, everybody is. Everybody's running. Why not run to win, right? Paul was the first, in it to win it person, okay? Why not run to win? Everybody else is running for prizes that are temporary. We are running for the ultimate prize, is what he says. So why not run to win? If you're going to be in the race no matter what, why not run to win? Why not run to win the ultimate prize? And when I started thinking about that, I started thinking about this week, and I started thinking through just that as a kid. Now, I don't know what it was like in America, but in Canada, in middle school and elementary school, they had us do these track and field days. They still do that in like middle school and stuff, where they teach you like to be in the Olympics, and you're really not because you're just a kid, right? And they won't let you do real cool stuff like javelin or anything like that, right? They just, it's just like running around in a circle. And it's the first time I remember being in an organized race where you had to kind of get, positioned in the little feet thing and have the little line, and then you got to, do the batons and marathons and sprints. And, they always had that, the statement where they're just like, on your mark, get set, go, ready, set, go. Ready yourself, get yourself ready, and then go. And it was really cool if they had the gun, because then kids really enjoyed that, right? They shoot the gun off, and kids forgot they had to run. It was just at least the way it was in my school. That was just really, really such a neat experience. But as I began to think through that, I began to think through, I'll be honest, that whole ready, set, go, ready, get, set, go, that only works in a few very small areas in life. In terms of, corporate, collective, trying to get everybody together to race a race. It really only works in a few areas. And yet what I find is that oftentimes this has kind of crept its way into what it looks like to follow God. This is what it looks like to do things in life, is that we need to be ready for things. We need to get all of our stuff set up, and then we need to go. And the problem is that's a really, really bad way to follow Jesus. Because I don't think I can't read the Bible. I can't give any personal examples of friends of mine or me where that has ever actually been the case. I've never been ready for anything God's called me to do, right? Ever. And in the times I thought I was ready, I wasn't ready. I thought I was ready to be a dad. No. I was not ready to be a dad. We laugh. We're expecting our third in just another week or two, and we laugh about the fact that we keep kind of trying to get ourselves ready, and we look at each other and laugh sometimes. We're not going to be ready at all, right? Like, don't even fool yourself. We're on the wave, right? We're just on the coaster. So here's the deal. This is where I look at it and go, okay, this whole ready, set, get, set, go, I understand why we use it in some ways, but other ways it really can hinder us. When we're constantly feeling we need to get ready. Listen, you know how many people need to take a step towards baptism, but they won't do it because they think they're not ready? I mean, you just heard AJ's testimony, you just heard Danielle's, and yet, still something in you goes, gosh, I should do that. I got to get myself ready. I got to get myself set. And then I can take that step. And that's just not the way it works. It's not the way it works in a life of faith. So I'm going to flip it around. We're going to talk about it a little bit differently today. I'm going to flip it all around. That's a no. This is a yes. Go, get set, ready. Okay, that's the way we're going to look at it from this point forward. Go, get ourselves set, and then ready. If you got your Bible, turn to Joshua in the Old Testament. the Old Testament. We're going to look there today. And Joshua is a really cool story. Joshua is Moses' right-hand man. So I'll kind of give you this. I'll skip creation and all the other parts of the Old Testament. You go right up to the fact that the people of Israel are slaves. Moses comes and frees them. God uses Moses to free them. Go through the Red Sea. They go out in the desert. They're making their way to the promised land. They're making their way to the land of their ancestors, of Abraham's, was given to Abraham. They're so excited. God's like working with them. They're grumbling, complaining. It's a long haul. God's doing some judging. They go send spies into the land. They decide they don't want to go into the land. They don't have any faith at all. So God has to kill an entire generation. Let a whole generation die wandering in the wilderness. And then when Moses sees the land, he's told by God, you don't get to go, but I'm going to let you see it. Because Moses had already by that point, lived 4 lives. And Joshua, who was his right-hand man, his chief commander, Joshua, who was there, God said, okay, Joshua, you're the one. You're the one who gets to take them. All this thing you've been waiting for your whole life, you are the one that gets to take them to the promised land. It's going to be awesome. He tells them in Joshua 1, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Never be satisfied. Just, go forward. Read the book of Moses. Read the instructions that I've given you. Don't veer away from, and listen, you're going to take them in the promised land. It's going to be amazing. So get ready. Pack your bags. In 3 days, we're going. So Joshua goes and tells the people, guess what? Today's the day. I love the way he starts his speech. We're just going to read that and stop there. In Joshua 3, he gets ready to tell the people, we're getting ready to go. We're getting ready to go. And he starts here and he says, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves. For tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. It's very interesting that, because this is a leader's dream. He's finally been told, they've been ready to go. He's been told, get the people ready. And this is one of those moments when you give an inspiring speech. You give a let's go get them speech, a power of self speech. If you can think it, you can do it, kind of speech. But Joshua instead starts off with this incredible Faith 101 moment where he reminds everyone there what their responsibility is and what God's responsibility is. And he starts the speech by saying, hey guys, we're getting ready to go. Consecrate yourself. That's your job. The Lord, because tomorrow the Lord is going to do something amazing among you. And I think sometimes, guys, serious, I think sometimes we get a little bit too antsy sometimes when we get ready to go. And this is where I want to be careful with today as a church. I'm not coming to you as a church to say, I'm not giving you any speeches like that. Let's go get them. Tiger, win it for the Gipper. I'm not doing any of that today, okay? At all. Joshua hits it the right way and says, look, there's something that I want you to understand. There's a responsibility that we have, which is what we talked about last week. There's a responsibility of consecrating yourself, which is really surrendering. It's a surrendered heart. And then from that, your actions are going to come. From that, you're going to take some steps. And guess what? This is God's job. Your job's to surrender. Guess what God's job is? To be awesome. That's what God's job is. His job is he's going to come and do something amazing among you. And yet we sometimes so often think it's our job, right? I think I put that up on the screen, that we so often want to make our job, is that slide up there? Sorry. Yeah. It's not about, go ahead and pull that up. It's not about what we do for God. This is where we get lost sometimes. It's really not about what we do for God. It's about the surrendered heart and asking God to do something in and through us. 3 weeks ago, we celebrated, the end of the year goal that we did, and you guys just crushed it and it was awesome. I think everybody forgot to give, by the way, in January. I'm just letting you know. Everybody did such a good job in December, right? But you guys crushed that goal, and when we celebrated it, but it wasn't because we were awesome. I don't want you to ever get that when we celebrate those things. It's because the people in our church collectively surrendered and gave back to God what was his and decided to do something with it, to invest it, leverage it, and it was God doing something in and through us. And I think sometimes when we get ready to, especially with vision things, I don't ever want us to fall out as a church and go, hey, we're going to do something awesome for God. He's so lucky to have us. No, it's about a surrendered heart. It's about consecrating ourselves. Just to give you an example, the 4 core ambitions that we talk about as a church, in terms of what it looks like for a disciple of Christ, someone who's living a life as a follower of Christ, these are the 4 things, and we give you the action and the result of that action, because we wanted to make it portable. We wanted to make sure that you understood these 4 things in these 4 categories. We always say, partnering brings community. The action brings a result. Growing brings change in your life. Serving brings purpose. Leading brings hope. That's awesome. But we also know there's a heart state there. The reason we focus on the action is because we know that if you finally take that step, we know that there's something that's probably already happened in your heart. The action will always point back to a heart issue. Listen, you can't partner. Okay, you don't give of your money. You don't invest in other people. You don't serve on Sundays and go to a life group with weird people. You don't do that unless you have somewhat surrendered yourself and your heart. Because there's a point of surrender where you got to surrender your rights. You got to surrender your comfort zone. You got to surrender certain things about you and your heart in order to take those steps to partner and then to embrace the community that he has for you. Same thing with, you have to have a teachable heart. In order to really grow in your learning, grow in your understanding, grow in your disciplines. In order to grow, you have to be teachable. You have to have a receptive heart that's listening for what God wants you to do and your next steps. Before you can grow and see the change, listen. We want to serve and bring hope to Lake Norman. Listen, I know you. I'm you. You're not going to do a single thing until your heart begins to break for the things that break God's heart. Until your heart begins to have some compassion for anyone other than you. You're not going to lift a finger to bring hope to Lake Norman. But I know that when you do, I know that when you begin to take those steps, there's something happening in there. That's a part of the whole heart state. Obedience. When you've been called, you've been given a commission by Jesus Christ to tell other people about how awesome he is and to point everyone to absolute hope. The only time you're ever going to do that is when your heart begins to surrender to the fact that you're called to be obedient to that end. It's when you begin to lead others. You begin to have hope yourself and begin to lead others towards a safe hope. It's all about this consecration. It's all about this. Other versions say purify yourself, and consecration is another good word for setting yourself apart. Saying I wholly belong to God. I think it was D.L. Moody, I believe, heard a British evangelist say this one time. He said, we have yet to see what God will do in and through and among and around a man whose heart is fully consecrated to God. Meaning we've left nothing behind. We've completely set it apart. We're completely surrendered, receptive, compassionate, obedient. And it's all fully yours. But that's where Joshua starts. Before we get into the whole go, get set, ready, Joshua starts with the heart. And said it's not about what you think you're going to do for God. It's about what God's going to do through you. All right. We're going to continue on and go to verse 8. Now Joshua has told them, do this. We're getting ready to go. In 3 days, we're leaving. And then he goes on to say this, give the command to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps in. Take a few steps into the river and stop there. Now, we have hindsight bias, okay? So it's very difficult for us. If you know the end of the story, please don't ruin it for the people who don't know the end of the story, okay? But the problem is when we have hindsight bias, we lose all suspense. We lose all sense of the story in terms of, well, we know what's going to happen, and we've already read this. I heard this as a child, right? But the point of the story is that when Joshua told them this, they didn't know. At this point, they still didn't know. All they were told is it's time to go. It's time to go. Let's go. But there's a river there. They don't know how they're going to cross it. They don't know if they're going to build boats. They have no idea how it's going to happen. But they're told to go. Matter of fact, they're told to go to the degree that they said, no, you're going to have to get your feet wet. You're going to have to tell the guys who carry the ark, come and tell the priests, they got to walk in and get their feet a little bit wet. They're going to stand in the river and then wait for me. And I can hear them now. I can hear them now listening to Joshua. That's awesome. What's next? What's going to happen after that? Wait, Joshua, do you know, do you have any idea what we're going to do when we get there? No, in 3 days, he told us to go. We're going to go stand in the river. Okay, cool. Do you know what's going to happen after we get over the river? I don't know, but in 3 days, we're leaving, we're going to pack up, we're going to go stand in the river. Cool. One quick question. Do you have any idea at all what's going to happen when we get to the river? No, but in 3 days, we're going to pack up, we're going to take steps, we're going to go in the river. That's what Joshua kept saying. See, this is the point when it comes to this whole go thing. When God calls us to go, most of us struggle to even take a step. Because most of the time, I'm just telling you, this is just my life experience. Most of the time, God does not give us more than a step. Most of the time, he doesn't just simply do anything else than say, I want you to go on that global outreach trip. I want you to do that. I want you to go serve at the rooms at the inn. Go do that. I want you to go give this money to this person. I want you to go help this person. I want you to go over to your neighbors today and ask them this question. When God begins to prompt our hearts and gives us these things to go, all of us, most of us that want to serve God go, it's awesome, God. And then we start going, yeah, but God, hold on. You know how much money that trip is? What's going to happen to my kids? How am I going to work that out with work? I've already got, and we just start going down the path. And we get derailed from ever taking a step by all the hows, right? All the hows. I put it on the screen. We always want God to show us how before we go. But the promise of how requires no faith. The promise of how requires absolutely no faith from us. And the reason I know that is because there have been a few times where God has actually revealed the how to me, and I still don't go. You understand? What makes you think if you don't trust God with the first step, you could ever trust him with the last step? Oh, no, if he just told me how I was going to go, I would go. I'd be a willing vessel. Bull. I'm calling it bull. A life of faith, a life that trusts that God knows best, a life of faith that knows that where he takes us for a reason. When he calls us to take a step out, I've never taken a step that I didn't learn something or experience something that he wanted me to experience, so that I could take another step, and another step, and another step. But most of us never go. Because we think, I'm not ready. I got to get ready. I got to get set. That's the order, right? I got to get ready, I got to get set, and then I can go. No, just go. That's calling you to take the step. We just celebrated Martin Luther King Day on Monday. Beautiful quote by Martin Luther King. He's talking about stairs, and he says, you take one step of the stairs so he can show you what the next step is, right? He's not going to show you what the next step is till you take a step. That's the whole point of going. That's the whole point of faith. To trust him with the first step so that he knows we can be trusted with the second. Go. Get set. Get set is the next step. Where am I on my notes? There we go. We're going to go down to verse 14. Get set. So the people left their camp. Okay, he's already given the instruction. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to go take some steps. Awesome. It's the end of the 3 days. The people left their camp to cross the Jordan. The priests who were carrying the ark did what they told. They went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. Now, let me just tell you what that little awesome sentence means, right? It means that they were told what to do to go. Awesome, let's go. They show up to the Jordan. I don't know what you have in your mind. It's a pretty massive river. It kind of meanders through the way. It goes from the Sea of Galilee in the north mountains, the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. And, it's already pretty stout as is, but it's still a river. It's not like it's not completely crossable. It's not like a creek or a crick, whatever you Southerners call it, right? It's not like they're going to hop over it. They get there, and it's flood season. Let me just tell you what flood season means. It means that now that the width of the river is over 1 mile wide, because it's so far below the surface of the sea level, that when it's at floodplains, it's just huge. And when it's at flood level, there's a current that runs about 40 miles an hour through it. And that's what they walked up to. God said, go, awesome, go, yes, check, 3 days, gonna step in the water, cool. They walk up, it's a flood level. Did anybody check this out before we got the instructions? Oh, we're supposed to step in there now? Take a few steps in and wait. See, the get set moment, I'll be honest with you, the get set moment is required of us because we're finite, we're human, we're going to immediately, whenever we take those steps, we're going to immediately run into circumstances that tell us we're wrong. And it requires us to, it tells them, go take a few steps and just stand there. God knew they were going to need to take a few steps and just take a moment to get set, to get our heart back into a surrendered place to say, okay, God, I'm here. But see, right here, even if I'm telling you, just as my experience with Christians, even Christians who have taken a step towards something, they've taken those few steps towards something God's called them to, they are so easily derailed by what circumstances they run into. because something didn't happen the way they thought it was going to. Okay, the creek wasn't, it's at its shallowest point. It was overflowing and raging. And God, I thought you were gonna work this out. Like you're the one who told us to cross in 3 days. And the problem is if when we don't get set, we don't have that positioning, that repositioning of our hearts, we allow circumstances. Number one, the enemy likes to take the circumstances that are not in our favor. He likes to convince you and lie to you that number one, you probably didn't hear from God. And number two, if you did hear from God, following God is dumb. That's what he wants to convince you. And if this is what following God looks like, your life is going to be miserable for the rest of your life. And I've seen Christian after Christian after Christian take steps, and then be immediately derailed because the circumstances they walk into are so not what they assumed they'd be. They assumed that God was gonna reveal the second and third and fourth step before they ever took the first one. So they stepped in and stood there. And they obeyed. Their heart was surrendered. They took a moment. I mean, you can read more things about the Jordan River this time. There's bushes and thicket all around. It wasn't an easy thing to cross, but they took some steps in. They stood in the river, and they went. And they had an opportunity to get set to say, okay, God, we're still going to follow you. We're still going to take this step. We're still going to remain here. It's easy to turn back. People were already probably murmuring about how maybe only the strongest were going to make it. Now watch what happens when they get ready. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water, the river's edge, the water above that point began to back up a great distance, away all the way to the town, Adam, which is in Zarethan. Okay, this is, if you looked at the map, it's way north. And it says, and the water below them, that point, then flowed to the Dead Sea. What? Until the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near to the town of Jericho. So again, we know the end of the story, and so it doesn't seem all that surprising, but I bet you anything when they stepped in the river, and they've just felt that current on their ankles. And they sat there and they had a moment to turn back. They had a moment to question God, but they used that get set moment to just look beyond the circumstances and remain in that place of faith. And then God did exactly what Joshua said he was going to do. Listen, God shows up. Sometimes he shows off, okay? This is a moment where he showed off. And he, instead of very similar in terms of the Red Sea, partying the way he parted it, he has them take the initiative first. And the moment that they do, he dries it up. Flood level, mile long, dries it up so that all of them can walk across as the Ark of the Covenant, which represented God going before them, stayed there. And then they built an altar to worship God, celebrate what he had done. Joshua wasn't lying. Surrender your heart. Give it all to him. You belong to him. Go. Get set and then be ready. Be ready for what God is getting ready to do. But if you miss any of those steps, I have a feeling we miss out what God's doing. If you don't take steps of faith when he calls you to take steps of faith, you don't ever get in the river. You don't ever move towards what he's calling you to do. I'm telling you, you are missing out on God doing some amazing things in your life. And then when you do take steps, seriously, when you take steps, you've got to be able to set yourself, your heart, get it rooted in who it is that you're following, because circumstances are going to tell you otherwise. That thing you're going to step out and try might fail initially. WD-40, WD-40, right? You know why it's called WD-40? It took 40 times to get it right, okay? Squeaky doors everywhere are so happy they didn't stop at like number 2, WD-2, right? 40 times it took to get it right. You think your first step is, we have such a delusion of what following God looks like, that if I follow God, it's a straight path, there's never a problem, there's never going to be something in the way, I'll never have to turn. Are you kidding me? Look, if you were to take a 3-year-old and give them an Etch-a-Sketch and just tell them to go crazy, they could probably map out what my life plan has looked like up to this point. Circles and figure eights and left turns and hard rights. Why? Because my life of faith is a step-by-step journey. telling you, God has never revealed a single thing. The only time I get into trouble is when God reveals a step to me and I assume it's going to lead over there. And I take a step, and then when it doesn't go there, I get disappointed in God. He didn't say he was going over there. I said I was going over there. He said, no, you're going to take this step because I'm going to get ready to do something, and then you're going to pivot and take another step. And you might even go in a direction you didn't even think you were going to go. You weren't even planning on going. That's the reason I'm leading. That's the reason God says I'm in charge. What's your job, Matt? Consecrate yourself. Surrender what you've been entrusted. Give it to me. Surrender what I've entrusted to you and give it back to me. I'm going to do something amazing if you'll just go. Get set. Be set. Be ready. I laughed. Jenna Terrell left this. She married an Australian dude. He's awesome, David. She left this morning and she said, you know, in Australia they say ready, steady, go. I thought that was pretty cool because steady sounds so much better, right, than get set. To go and then be steady. Steady in knowing who called us to go in the first place. And then be ready to see what God's going to do. There's story after story after story that I continue to hear of people who do take those steps of faith. And they come back as if it's a surprise. You wouldn't believe what happened. And I go, yes, I would. I really would. I would believe it. Who told you to go? Now listen, this is the tough message. This is the message where I get emails all week long, and she quit her job, and he put a for sale sign on the house, and well, Matt, we're not coming to Journey anymore, right? This is just one of those days. Here's where it comes back to the surrendered heart part. I got to go back and revisit this. The reason the surrendered heart part's important, the consecrate yourself part is important, because we're not talking about cliff jumping, cliff diving. We're not talking about reckless behavior. We're talking about steps of faith. We're talking about doing things that may look completely, yes, oddball, but we're not talking about recklessness. All right, steps of faith are not reckless when you know who's calling you to go. If you're Peter, right, and you're out in the middle of the ocean, and you're going to take a step out of the boat in the middle of the night with a raging sea around you, you better be darn certain that Jesus told you to come out, right? If you jump off a cliff and Jesus didn't tell you to, the bottom's all you got to thank for it later. I've made some very reckless decisions in my life, claiming that it was all about God when it was all about me. Okay, God's no fool. But when you surrender that heart of yours, when you begin to surrender what He's entrusted to you, and you say, God, just take it, use it all. It's all yours. And then He says, okay, go. You know what our job is? To go. Take the step. Take that step of faith. Steady ourselves. Get ourselves set. Know that circumstances are going to try to convince us otherwise. And then be ready for what God's going to do. Because it's not about how awesome you are and what the awesome thing you're planning to do for God. It's about, look what the Lord is going to do amazing among you. So what is it? What is that step that He's calling you to take? What is it? Everybody has one. You know, we've all had something, a little tug in our heart. Maybe it's baptism. Maybe it's one of the trips I mentioned. Maybe it's not even something at our church. Maybe it's something in your work. Maybe it's something in your family. Maybe it's something with your children. Maybe it's something with an adult parent. God's tugging at you and saying, take this step. I know it's a river to cross. I know you don't know how it's going to happen, but I want you to take the step. What is it going to be for you? What is that step that you're waiting to be ready? What is it? You know, the church, we gave you these numbers last time, these 3,000, 300,000. I want you to understand, these are not destinations. These are not mountaintops for us. They're steps. They're just steps. Okay, doing 3 campuses, they're just steps. They're just steps towards what we know God has called us towards in a direction. And so we're going to take the steps. We don't have all the hows figured out. We're trusting in the one who's called us to take the steps. 3,000 stories. You know what 3,000 stories is for? Because when circumstances begin to tell us otherwise, the stories of lives changed by hope, they're the measuring stick we use to tell us that we're still on track. They're the impact that this church is having. That when the money doesn't seem to be coming in right, or the circumstance doesn't, or that campus isn't gonna, that one, the way it works, it ain't gonna fly, we gotta find a different location. When all those things begin to tell us, oh no, all the circumstances come back and say, I don't know, Matt. I don't know. We're going to look at these stories and we're going to go, I know who's in charge. Look at whose lives are being changed by Jesus Christ. That's why we want to do the stories. Money to Lake Norman, the needs of Lake Norman, man, that's huge. We have no idea how it's all going to happen. We have plans, we have ideas, but we don't ultimately know. We're just taking steps. That's what these are. They're just steps. What step are you going to take? Listen, God has brought you to where he's brought you. He's taken you to a certain place in your life. You are where you are. You have the circle of friends and influence you have. You have the resources and experience and passion. You have everything that he's entrusted you with to take some steps of faith in your life. What is it? You can't stay where you are. We can't stay here as a church. It's not time to be comfortable. It's time to act and move in faith. Would you guys stand with me? Here's what I want to do today. I just want us to sing. I want us to sing a little bit in response to God. I'll come up and pray afterwards. But I want us to take just a few minutes and respond. Respond to this. Even if you don't sing the words, here's the deal. Even if you don't sing the words, I don't want this to shake you too quickly. I want you to sit on it for a little while. What is that thing he's calling you to step out into? What is it? And what are you going to do about it? Let's sing together.
We hope you've enjoyed engaging in our worship experience. Everything we do at Journey is to help make a difference in people's lives. If God has been moving and working in your life, we would love to hear your story. You can share it with us at mystory@thejourneyonline.com. If you would like to invest in the ministry and mission at Journey Church, you can give online at thejourneyonline.com. Thank you for investing in the lives that are changing at Journey Church.